Rise and shine, campers, and welcome back to another Camp Legend Lorcana video with your boy Gibbles and Bits. I'm pretty stoked to be bringing you this video today. We're going to be breaking down my experience and my run that ended up netting me second place at my store championship here at the Greater Memphis Magic Arena in Memphis, Tennessee this past weekend for our Lorcana Store Championship. We're going to be breaking down the deck, some of the matchups, why I chose the deck, ways to play it, ways to play against it. But before we get into any of that, if you aren't already, go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel. It helps out a lot. We've got a lot of content on the YouTube channel, like our starter set where we go over a different digital card game every single month. We've got videos for Lorcana, Pokemon TCG, Star Wars TCG, and all of the other games that we are currently interested in for both Ian, Mark, and myself. Come join us on Discord where we're chatting about all of these games. We've got a pretty lively community that we all love, and it's a great community to be a part of. Without further ado, let's get into it. So this past weekend, like I said, at the store championship, I placed second out of, I think it was 32 players. So pretty nice showing. I didn't take home the gold, but I did take home some pretty sweet prizes like this Rockstar Stitch Enchanted Art mat. The only difference between this and the first place mat is that it has the word champion in the top right-hand corner, which I would have loved, but can't be mad at this mat. It's just an awesome artwork. I do love the mat itself. That was for making it to the finals, along with, for making it to the top four, this Rockstar Stitch Enchanted promo card, which is going for quite a lot right now, but people are going to be accumulating them through all the different store championships that are happening right now and happening this upcoming weekend as well. Between those two things, I also received quite a bit of packs for my success on getting second place. And let's go ahead and look at the deck. We're going to talk about kind of the path I took and some of the matchups that I ended up facing. All right, so I'm showing on the screen right now my deck that I ran this past weekend called Get Out of My Church. Shout out to my boy Friar Tuck in this deck. He's one of my favorite cards right now in Lorcana. This is a Emerald Steel discard list. Now, why did I choose this list? Well, originally, up until the night before the championship, before the tournament, I thought that this tournament was going to be mirroring the same format that the set championships for Atlanta and Chicago were, where all of Swiss is the best of two format, where either you go first in the first game or you go first in the second game. You get a point for every win that you get. And if you 2-0 your opponent in the two games, you get 3 points instead. So an extra benefit for going 2-0 in a matchup. And I chose this deck because this deck does pretty well going second. Like, not a lot of decks. There's a pretty stark disadvantage at going second, so being what they call on the draw versus on the play. And this deck kind of makes up some of that ground and has a good way to close that gap, giving me a good chance to 2-0 people. Well, to my surprise, I found the night before, even after doing all this testing, my store championship and all of the other store championships were best of three format, like the normal best two games out of three in the Swiss rounds, which we played 5 of. And then when it cuts to a top 8, it's also still the best of 3. So it was best of 3 the whole tournament. It didn't really matter. It didn't really change the deck. It didn't change any of my testing because the goal is to win in every single matchup, right? So you're going to go second plenty of times in a best of 3 format as well, especially if you lose the roll and you end up going second twice in a matchup if you ends up going to a game 3, because most likely your opponent is going to choose to go first. That's typically kind of the better play. You want to go first as many times as you possibly can. So I chose this deck to give me the best chance at winning when going second. Just a brief overview of the decks that I ran into in my tournament. In the 5 rounds of Swiss and in the top 8, I ran into 1 Sapphire Ruby Ramp Item Control, which is a really popular deck right now. Took home the championship in that past Thea Beastie Lorcana Pixelborn tournament. That deck won. 2 Sapphire Steel Ramp Control decks, which was second place in that same Pixelborn tournament. 1 Ruby Amber Mufasa deck. 2 Ruby Amethyst, kind of like mid-range control, somewhere in that realm. The lists are relatively similar, it feels like, for a Ruby Amethyst, but there's probably about 5 to 10 slots that are kind of variable. So I kind of lump them all together at this current time. And then I had 2 mirror matches against 2 other individuals that were playing Emerald Steel. One of them, shout out to Ben Chappell, who won the whole tournament and I faced in the finals. He also ran a Emerald Steel discard list. We had a really close match. It went to 3 games, but he came out with the victory. So congrats to Ben again. I've been shouting him out in all the videos I can where I'm talking about this tournament experience. He's a great guy and he's a fantastic player, and he deserved all of the accolades and all of the championship winnings that he got. So going over some of the matchups that I just talked about, I think the hardest ones for me were Sapphire Steel, specifically because 2 of the biggest problem cards for this discard aggro deck is A Whole New World and Grab Your Swords. We're running a lot of cheap guys, want to go wide. They don't necessarily have the biggest health pool stats. And a song like Grab Your Swords can clear out your entire board if you can't play around it, despite this deck having a lot of ways to discard cards from your hand or from your opponent's hand, and even look at your opponent's hand with things like Ursula Deceiver to see what they've got and discard specific song cards. But if they can get off Grab Your Swords or A Whole New World to reset your hands after you've been trying to whittle it away, then it can be kind of a tricky matchup. And that's exactly what happened to me in round 1. I actually lost round 1, 0-2, and was having to reevaluate my life and my tournament experience. I was like, hey, did I come in with too high expectations? I just got bodied 0-2 in the first round. Well, I kind of lit a fire underneath me, and then from there, I won all 4 of my last rounds of Swiss. 3 out of the 4 were 2-0s. So I kind of started sweeping people. The only one in the Swiss format that I didn't sweep, and it was a 2-1 victory, was against my good friend Cody, who also was the 3rd player of the 2 matchups I had. Me, Ben, and Cody were running the green or the Emerald Steel aggro list, and Ben and Cody's list were pretty similar. Mine had some differences. I do think that Sapphire Steel was a pretty tough matchup, and then the mirror match is always going to be 50-50, so that's kind of it's always a toss-up about can you get the upper hand on your opponent. And I was chatting with Ian about this as he's preparing for tournaments of his own, and we were talking about the discard list, and it really is down to what cards you draw versus your opponent's cards. It's not any in particular, but just the combination, because there are certain cards that work well together. But if you get a clunky hand where you don't have good follow-ups to the things you played the previous turn, then you might struggle a little bit and your opponent might get the upper hand on you. So let's take a look at the list here. I'm going to kind of give an in-depth breakdown of the cards that I chose to build this deck list and why, and some of the spice that I put in here, which I do think my list is honestly pretty spicy for this archetype. So we're running Cursed Merfolk and Captain Hook at the 1-drop slot, so 8 1-drops total. That I don't think is necessarily spicy. I don't think everybody is running Captain Hook. Almost everybody is running Cursed Merfolk because this card is just bonkers. Being able to drop on 1, despite being uninkable, it's really not a big deal because you can probably drop it on turn 1, and from there, an uninkable is out of your hand. It's not sitting in your hand. But your opponent has to discard whenever they challenge it, so it's kind of a come-get-me card, which only works towards your winning condition, right? And it quests for 2. Quests pretty hard for a 1-drop. Captain Hook has a pretty aggressive stat line to be able to challenge into locations like a Queen's Castle, which can be a problem if you can't deal with it, or other big units. I'm going to jump down here a couple slots down just to off of the back of Captain Hook. We are also playing Mr. Smee, Bumbling Mate. Mr. Smee, at the end of your turn, if this character is exerted and you don't have a captain character in play, deal 1 damage to this character. Captain Hook is a captain character. So ideally, when we're going second, I would try to get out Captain Hook and Mr. Smee, because those are 2 kind of imposing 1-drops and 2-drops to be able to get out, and Smee also quests for 2. Flynn Rider is basically the same text as Cursed Merfolk and quests the same way, with a little bit of a bigger stat line, being able to discard a card from your opponent's hand when they're challenged. Ursula Deceiver, this was a tricky card to play. It wasn't necessarily as straightforward as people would think it was. When you play this character, chosen opponent reveals their hand, and you can discard a song card of your choice. This is different than Bare Necessities. Bare Necessities in Amber says a non-character card. This is specifically songs. People have become wise to Ursula Deceiver. She makes her way into almost every Emerald deck, regardless of the archetype. So people will start discarding or mulliganing away songs out of their hand if they know that their opponent is playing Emerald. especially this archetype. Sorry about that. So Ursula Deceiver was actually a better card to play later in the game, closer to when your opponent would want to play key cards like that Grab Your Swords, the A Whole New World. I think the only 2 decks where I would consider playing this card onto is against Ruby Amethyst, because one of their best songs, probably their best song outside of Be Prepared, which you can usually, if you play it right, you can discard your opponent down far enough where it's hard for them to get to 7 ink to play Be Prepared. So you can kind of control their hand through that and take care of Be Prepared that way. I like playing Ursula on 2 against Ruby Amethyst because you can ditch friends on the other side, which draws them more cards and works against your goal of discarding their hand out and kind of ruining some of their engine. Prince John, Greediest of All. This is one of the linchpin cards in the deck. He's got Ward, which is fantastic. You'll see that theme within my deck of the Ward. Whenever your opponent discards 1 or more cards, you may draw a card for each of the cards that they have discarded. So what I would do is there were even times where I'm going first, I would play a bit passively. I would drop Curse Merfolk on 1, Flynn Rider on 2, go to units that say if you challenge into me, then you discard a card, but not quest with them yet. Then on turn 3, if I had Ursula Deceiver of All, and we'll get to her in a second, I would drop her instead. But if not, drop Prince John on 3 and then quest with Curse Merfolk and Flynn, because at least if my opponent is going to choose to clear those units and attack them to stop me questing on later turns, they're going to discard cards. I'm going to gain cards off of it, and there's a bigger swing there in tempo. Ursula Deceiver of All, another linchpin card of this deck. Whenever this character sings a song, you may play that song again. So you basically sing each song twice, and then it goes on the bottom of your discard. Biggest targets for Ursula Deceiver to sing are Sudden Chill. Sudden Chill is an absolute brutal card with Ursula Deceiver of All. So you play your 1-drops, your 2-drops, whatever you need to do. On turn 3, you drop Ursula Deceiver of All. And on turn 4, you can undercurve a little bit. You've already got the ink for it. You drop Prince John, and then you sing Ursula Deceiver. You sing Sudden Chill with Ursula Deceiver of All. Your opponent discards 2 cards. You gain 2 cards, and that's a really big swing for your hand versus your opponent's hand. You can also sing songs like Let the Storm Rage On, where you'll end up dealing 4 damage or 2 damage split amongst 2 different units, and then you draw 2 cards off of it. So 1, still great card draw and damage. We're also running 3 copies of Strength of a Raging Fire. Deal damage to a chosen opposing character equal to the number of characters that you have in play. So sometimes you can get a wide enough board out with some cheap characters to really kill something big with strength. But usually if you're around the 2 to 3 mark with strength, it's kind of in range to kill something in that mid-game range that you would probably need to clear. Or you can double up on 1 target. Like if you have 3 units, you can double sing strength with Ursula and do 3 damage twice to kill something like a Flaversham. For these Sapphire decks, they're trying to ramp and discard their items for more card draw. So I chose to run 4 copies of Sudden Chill because the discard, we're doing so much of it. So Let the Storm Rage On, the card draw, along with the damage, is pretty reliable, and we like this card. Strength of Raging Fire, you don't always get to have the wide board that I talked about. So running 3 copies instead of 4, not always as applicable, despite it also being inkable. Moving on to the rest of our cards, Benja, Guardian of the Dragon Gem. This is a really crucial card right now. Not all of the discard lists are running Benja, but I think every deck should be running Benja if you are playing Steel at least, because a lot of items running around right now. And he banishes an item on play. And he quests for 2, and he doesn't have that bad of a body for a 3-drop. And he's inkable. So Benja is really crucial at stopping the momentum of ramping with these Sapphire decks. So if I ever know that I'm playing Sapphire Steel, I'm playing against Sapphire Ruby, I will mulligan for Benja to get him into my hand, play him on 3 if I can, and ditch a Fishbone Quill or a Popsicle if need be, or even a Shield of Virtue. There's a lot of Sapphire Ruby decks that are running Shield of Virtue nowadays. Friar Tuck, Priest of Nottingham. Not a lot of people knew about this card until Spessy started making this deck, and that's where this shell kind of spawned from, was Spessy. When you play this character, the player or players with the most cards in their hand chooses and discards a card, so he works right on curve with Prince John. You drop Prince John on 3, You drop Friar Tuck on 4 if they have more cards, and it's this fun kind of game of, okay, if I discard a card and then I play Friar Tuck, okay, now I'm at 3 cards, they're at 4. It's a perfect swing. He quests for 2. He's got a pretty good defensive stat line, which we love to see. This card was an MVP for me all weekend. I ended up ditching, sacrificing a card, the last card out of my hand, but I ditched an opponent's Be Prepared, which was their last card that they had in hand with Friar Tuck, which saved my board and won me the that match. Now is where we get into the spicy stuff, right? This is my super spice that no one is running. Kuzco Temperamental Emperor from the first set. He has Ward, which is the key. When this character is challenged and banished, you may banish the challenging character in return. He quests for 3, super hard. Still got that same great stat line as Friar Tuck. He is uninkable, so we are only running 2 copies of him. But Kuzco quests super hard, and you run into the situation a lot in the late game where you've discarded a bunch of cards from your opponent's hand, whittled them down, and stopped their kind of ramp or their game plan, and you're ahead on lore. Maybe you're like at 13 or 14 or something like that, and you're almost in top deck mode, and your opponent is almost in top deck mode. Well, my deck runs a little bit of a greedier top end to pull some quality units. When you're top decking, the things you need to avoid are your opponents being able to play things like a Medusa or draw a spell or a song like Along Came Zeus, where they can deal 5 damage to you, or a Storm Rage, something like that. You need to be able to protect your units. So I heavy loaded my top end between Kuzco and Pete Bad Guy with these warded units that I can safely drop them on board, and my opponent cannot touch them until I exert them and they want to challenge them, or they have to use a board clear, which is not as easy to come by, like a Grab Your Swords, which hopefully I've already discarded from their hand by then. So Pete Bad Guy also is a really great 5-drop here. He quests for 2. He can't be touched. He's got a decent stat line, that 4 defense. But also, if you sing one of your songs with Ursula, Deceiver of All, and Pete Bad Guy is out, you're technically singing that song with Ursula twice, so you do trigger Pete's ability. Whenever you play an action, this character gets +2 attack. You'll get that buff twice, have the 7 attack for his Who's Next ability. While this character has 7 attack, he gains 2 lore. So you can quest for 4 instead of 2. That did happen a couple times in the tournament, and it was really valuable. Beast Tragic Hero for card draw. Not too much to talk about this character. Beast actually was almost in contention for cutting because he is weak to Madame Medusa, which is a very popular red removal tool right now, along with the Along Came Zeus. But we kept him in there. The card draw was really great, especially in the mirror match. And then 1 copy of Robin Hood Daydreamer. I waffled back and forth, and this was my last change, was between Cloud Kicker and Baboom. I ultimately went with Baboom, and it was very, very important in this deck. I can't speak highly enough about this card because it hits locations if you need to try to take out a Queen's Castle quickly, if you have that Ruby Amethyst matchup. Or Baboom is really good and almost like a mulligan condition, like a hard mulligan condition, if you're going second against Steel Song or against a deck you know is running Robin Hoods to do that the 1 cost into the 5 cost shift on turn 3 for the Robin Hood Champion of Sherwood. Baboom takes out that Robin Hood on turn 2 before they can shift it. And that was really, really important because it is tough to remove Robin Hood effectively with this deck if they get that shift off. Overall, curve is very low to the ground here. Very accessible. We're running 14 uninkables. Most are only running 12 orbits or 14. Some people are running Tiana. A couple copies of Tiana at the 4 slot instead of Kuzco. I think Kuzco fits this deck a little bit better. Quest a little harder, helps me get to my win condition. Instead of trying to shut off some of the songs, I think it's really vulnerable. I think Tiana is great, but I do think she is vulnerable to red. Some things like Maui or some of these other rush characters like Scar that can take out a Tiana and then are kind of null and void, right? They didn't really do a whole lot of damage back. Where Kuzco says, if I quest and you want to come attack me and come get me and banish me, I'm doing it right back to you. I'm stopping you in your tracks right there. The ward was really important for me at the top end, and I honestly would not change a thing about this deck, with the exception of 1 slot. I've considered changing this Robin Hood Daydreamer with the 6 cost, which something that quests for 4 at 6 ink is a fantastic. I do love this card, But there's also something valuable to knowing that you only really have to cap yourself if you want to only play a thing or two per turn at 5 ink. I've considered making this Robin Hood Daydreamer a 4th copy of Benja because items are not going away. Items are going to continue to be prevalent. And instead of having to dig for Benja, it would be nice to organically, most likely, come across a Benja in the mid to early turns if I don't end up mulliganing and finding it in those key matchups, that I'll come across it and I can ditch those items. Benja's actually a pretty good late game card to end up finding because he does still quest for 2 and he gets rid of something on your opponent's board. That's about the only thing I would change about this deck. If you're piloting this deck, I think my one piece of advice is if you want to run this version, Captain Hook and Smee are going to be your best friends when going second. Otherwise, going first, you want to aggressively go for your discard line, like your Cursed Merfolk into your Flynn, into your Ursula Deceiver of All, Prince John on 4, hit him with a Sudden Chill, or hit him with a Strength, or a Let the Storm Rage, or something like that. A lot of decks don't necessarily have the ability to deal with Ursula Deceiver of All on turn 3 from a song perspective until she's exerted after double singing a song, and then they might be able to attack enter, but you've already done your damage at that point, so you're okay with it. Quest aggressively, quest hard. You want to get out in front of your opponent, but don't just give your opponent free trades without getting something back for it. If you don't have to print, if you can wait a turn or two to quest with some of your discard units, that your units that force your opponent to discard, wait till you drop Prince John and then start questing with them. So that way you get that card draw in return. There will be plenty of games that you end up in top deck mode and you can still win games that way. Some decks I think that do really well against this, if you're playing against this deck, if your opponent is questing with their discard units and they don't have Prince John out, just take the hit, discard the card if you can afford it, and just they don't get the extra benefit of getting their extra cards out of the Prince John itself. If you are mulliganing against Green Steel, get rid of your songs. Or if you end up mulliganing and drawing into a song and you can ink it. Because odds are some of your opponents that are running this type of deck are going to play Ursula Deceiver on 2. And it's really bad for tempo if they Ursula Deceiver and see that you don't have any songs and they didn't get anything out of it. They just played a 1/3 generic card for as a 2-drop. Granted, they got some information from your hand and they know what you're running or what you've got in your hand, but that's not enough to justify a 2-drop if it's just a 1/3 vanilla plane. They're better off playing something else. So make them waste that turn. Some other good cards that are really good against this Green Steel deck are Minnie Mouse Stylish Surfer, which is really popular in the Ruby Amethyst decks, along with Queen's Castle. Locations are not very easy for this deck type to get rid of, but that's why I run Pete for the additional buff attack as well as the Baboom. So I've teched to be able to handle locations a little bit better than maybe some of my counterparts. That's all I really need to talk about for this deck. Let me know if you want to run this deck. I would be happy to do practice games with anybody or give you a little bit of a further deck breakdown guide. I had a really fun time at the tournament. It was an awesome experience. I'll be competing in another tournament at another local game store called Blackwater Marsh this upcoming weekend. I'm probably going to bring this same list since I had success with it previously. And if I end up making another good solid run, maybe I'll do another video on it. So let me know what else you guys want to see from our Lorcana videos, and I'll catch you guys next time.